I'm not sure exactly when it happened. It was sometime in my early 30s when I started to develop anxiety around flying. And I'm not sure why. Up to that point, I had flown all over the country. I had flown internationally. I had flown all kinds of places, more times than I could count, and it never bothered me at all. I didn't give it second thought. But we had planned a trip, Carrie and Ethan and I, to go somewhere. I don't even remember where it was. And we were going to get there by plane. And as the trip neared, as the time for us to leave drew near, I found myself getting worried and anxious. And at the center of my anxiety was getting on that airplane. Now look, I know that that's an irrational fear. I know up here that flying is one of the safest forms of transportation in human history, that you are far more likely to put yourself at risk driving to the airport than I get all that. I get all of that, and I got all of that up here. But for whatever reason down here, I just couldn't get it. And I was anxious, and I was worried, and I was nervous. Pushed through it, got on the plane, and everything was fine, and just like it always was. And actually, once we were moving and in the air, I was okay. And then we landed, and we began our trip, and guess what I began to think about? The flight home, right? Because now I'm there, and I got to get back, and suddenly I found myself anxious about trying to get back. And of course, we got back, and everything was okay, and we were perfectly safe. But this really bothered me. And I wonder, I don't know where it came from. I don't know why it started. I began to try to do some reading to figure out what was going on, because that's what I do. So I started reading. I ran across some things that said it wasn't uncommon for people to develop anxiety around flying after they have their first child. And my experience of having a child is that I suddenly had all kinds of anxieties I didn't have before I had a child. And so that kind of made some sense for me. But I'm not sure that it matters. I'm really not sure that it matters where it came from or why it started. All I know is that it happened. And it's still there. It hasn't gone anywhere. It's frustrating. It's maddening. It's a little embarrassing. I don't like it. I do not like that I have anxiety about getting on a plane and going somewhere, and I wish it didn't happen. But it does. Whether it's flying or something else, every one of us has fears and anxieties. Some of them are small, some of them are large. Some of us have more fear, some of us have less, some of us have more anxiety, some of us have less. But every single one of us at some point in our life will experience fear and will experience anxiety. Some of our fears are absolutely rational. There's a lot about which we can be anxious or afraid. And at this particular point in our history, there seems to be a lot of anxiety and fear in the air. It's out there. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I don't know about you, but I find myself anxious every time I turn on my computer for the first time, or I get some kind of notification that there's breaking news. I mean, it just feels like this is a time of higher anxiety and worry than I remember before in life. It's just there. And again, some of that fear and anxiety is justifiable. Some of it, though, isn't so justifiable. Some of it gets the best of us in a way, and some of us really isn't as frightening or as risky as we might perceive it to be. But it's still there, and it doesn't matter. One way or the other, whether it's good or bad, we experience fear. The problem with fear is that it can take life from us. Anxiety can take life from us. It can prevent us from experiencing the abundant life that we are called to experience. At the same time, fear can save our life. In fact, fear can be a very good thing, and it's a necessary thing, and it's something that we need to survive. So we got to find a balance. We've got to find a way through. How do we deal with our fears? How do we confront them? How do we work through our anxieties? How do we find the balance between what's good fear and bad fear, good anxiety and bad anxiety, and how do we kind of sort through that? For the next few weeks, we're going to talk about fear. We're going to talk about anxiety. And one of the reasons that we're doing this is because in December, I told you about the promise that God makes, that God is always with us. When Jesus was born, Jesus became Emmanuel, God in the flesh, God with us. And because of that, we need not fear. And even as I heard myself saying those words, I thought, those are nice words, preacher. But words don't always cut it in the face of fear and anxiety. And sometimes I need more than just words. I need something that I can act upon. And I need that. I've said multiple times before, you will never hear me preach a sermon that I don't need to hear myself. I need to hear this, and I need to work through this. And so I turned to a resource of mine that I often turn to, a guy named Adam Hamilton. And we've done a lot of Hamilton stuff because he's just so good. I really like the way he thinks and the way he writes. He recently wrote a book called Unafraid, Living with Courage and Hope in Uncertain Times. Very, very good book. If this is something that you deal with, if this is something that you're interested in, I really encourage you to read this book. If you want to go deeper, there's some study materials out there. You can go and listen to his sermons on the topic. Very, very good stuff. This is going to be at the center of our dialogue and our conversation, and we're going to touch base with this book quite a bit as we work through this series. And my hope is that as we do so, as we deal with some of the things that cause us fear, worry, and anxiety, we can find some good news, because I do believe that there's good news to be found in the midst of this. And I think we could all benefit from hearing that good news. I want to begin with just kind of a little bit of background on fear and why it's a good thing. And I am speaking in very general terms here. I am not an expert in science or neurology or any of those kinds of things. And so I'm going to oversimplify this. But basically, we've been given a couple systems, at least a couple systems in our bodies that God has given us. We are created to have fear, and these systems are meant to save our lives. It's a good thing. For example, if you find yourself experiencing a threat to you that could harm you or put you in danger, there is a biological response that happens instinctually. We often refer to it as fight or flight, right? This moment where something triggers and we know we've got to move into action. Clinicians have added another word to that, freeze. Recently, as I've been looking at this, I've discovered this fight, flight, or freeze. And there may be some other responses that people have when they're confronted with real risk or danger in their life. But fight, flight, or freeze are very common. And we drop into those things kind of subconsciously and just instinctually. And where that starts is this place in the brain called the amygdala. And the amygdala is like the brain's, it's like the brain's alarm system. It's constantly receiving information. Everything about our senses, what we see, what we hear, what we smell, what we taste, what we touch. It's taking all of those senses that we're pulling in to our brains, and it's sorting out and it's sorting through those. And one of its primary purposes is to look for threats. And if it sees a threat, it throws out an alarm signal. Our heart rate increases. Adrenaline starts to flow. We start to breathe a little bit faster. Our hands may get a little bit sweaty. We start to experience just kind of some emotions of maybe dread or fear or excitement, and our body starts to prepare so that we can respond to the threat that we're facing. And all of this is happening. We're not even aware of it happening. It's something we can't control. It's something that's going on in the background, and it is something that we have all experienced to some degree. And it's a good thing, because it can, in very real ways, save our lives. And that's why we have the amygdala. That's why it does that, and we should be grateful for it. At the same time, sometimes, for a variety of reasons, the amygdala sends out a false alarm. It picks up something that it thinks is a threat, and it sends out that threat alarm, which causes us to experience that threat response, that fight, flight, or freeze response, to something that really isn't a threat. And to some degree, that happens to us all. Sometimes we just get a little bad information in the amygdala, and it kind of fires, and we can kind of talk ourselves down from that. But for a lot of people, it's something that they deal with on a regular basis. For people in our country, 18 or over, approximately 40 million of us have some kind of disordered anxiety response. It's just an anxiety to some kind of external stimulus or internal thing that's going on that's kind of outside the norm, right? So we've got our norms, which really none of us are normal, but there's these normal level of things. And then there's some anxieties that are high, they're heightened. There's about 40 million of us that have anxiety that would be considered to be out of the norm, out of the order. So just to give you a little bit of perspective, that's 1 in 6 of us. 1 in 6 of us is dealing with some kind of heightened anxiety or fear, right? So that means we know people who are struggling with this. And for those who do struggle with it, it's really, really hard. If you've ever experienced the fight, flight, or freeze response, if you've ever experienced that sudden rush of adrenaline and what happens, maybe you've just avoided a traffic accident or something scared you while you were out walking or something like that, and you've experienced that, it gets you pretty wound up, and you've got to come down off of that. Now imagine being at that heightened state on a pretty regular basis in ways that you can't always control. It's exhausting, and it's frightening. If that describes some of the ways that you experience the world, if that's where you are, the first thing that I want to say is you are not alone and you are not broken. 1 in 6 of us. 1 in 6 of us are in that place. So it's okay. There's also some help that you can get. There's clinical help, there's medicinal help, there's therapeutic help, there's ways to work beyond that. But it's hard, and we get that. And so if you're in that place, we want you to find the support and help that you need. Secondly, if you're not in that place, but you know someone who is, I just really want to ask you to try as much as you can to offer grace, patience, and understanding. The person who's dealing with that anxiety response, they know that it's not always rational. They know that it's not always something that they really need to be afraid of. They get that. They're just as frustrated by it as you are, right? They don't want it to happen. And so often, because we get our response is one of fear or worry, we try to talk them down, we try to tell them it's okay, we try to settle everything. That's not helpful. We just need to sit there, and we just need to be there, and we just need to walk through it with them, because it's something they can't always control, okay? So sometimes that good thing that's the amygdala goes a little bit off, and sometimes we get some stuff that's kind of disordered, and we want to try to push through that. The second system that God's given us that really helps us is foresight. Foresight is the ability for us to plan for future threats that may or may not happen. And we do this all the time. For example, when you got up and got in the car to drive to church today, I hope you put your seatbelt on. And if you did not, when you leave church today, I hope you will put your seatbelt on. Not just because I don't want you to get a ticket, but because accidents happen and no one plans on them happening. And seatbelts are proven to save lives. And so we put our seatbelts on in hopes that that will never become an issue for us, but we got to put them on. If it's cold in the morning, what do? What do you grab? Grab a jacket so that you can stay warm if something happens. If you're able to and you've got the funds to do it, you set up an emergency fund so that if something goes wrong in your life, you've got some funds set aside that you can address it. How many of you have medicines right now in your medicine cabinet that you haven't used within the last 3 months, 6 months, a year? We have medicine in our medicine cabinet that we do not use, and then it expires. And we throw the medicine out. And then you know what we do? We buy more of the exact same medicine that we didn't use until it expired. Why? Because there might come a time that we need that medicine. And when we need that medicine, we want it to be there. This is good. God has given us the ability to look into the future, to plan for things that we might need, and even if we don't need them, we've got them there. And that is a good thing. However, sometimes our imagination gets the best of us, right? And sometimes, instead of just planning in normal, healthy ways for what might come in the future, we start to do this thing. This is what I call it. We start to borrow trouble. We start to imagine a future of trouble, fear, worry, and harm that may or may not happen, but we start to dwell on it. We start to really think about it. You know my favorite time to do that? About 2:15 in the morning. I love to do it then. I don't know what happens for me. I will wake up at 2:15 in the morning, and all of a sudden I'll think, hey, what if? And the next thing I know, I have spent 30 minutes to an hour to 2 hours or whatever thinking about something that may or may not ever happen. And I've borrowed trouble, and I've borrowed worry, and I've borrowed concern. And this is what I've learned about that. When I'm thinking about some possible future worry or concern that may or may not happen, I am not living in the moment. I'm so worried about what may or may not happen that I'm not enjoying the here and now. And that is no way to live. It's good to plan. It's good to prepare. That's very healthy. But sometimes our imaginations just get the best of us, and it spins off a little bit. So fear is a good thing. It's a very good thing. It saves our lives right now, in the moment, instinctually, and it helps us to protect ourselves from harms that may come in the future. But every once in a while, things get a little bit out of whack, and the thing that's meant to save our life takes life away from us. What we're going to do over the next several weeks, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the legitimate reasons for concerns, how we can keep those from becoming something that's overwhelming for us, how we can use clinical ways to get through it, spiritual ways to get through it, community ways to get through it, how we can deal with this. And there's a lot of things that we're going to talk about, but the first thing that I want to mention when it comes to fear and moving towards a life that's less afraid and more filled with courage and hope, the first step that we have to take when it comes to fear and anxiety is we have to name our fears and anxieties. And I know that this seems basic, but this is not always easily done. Some people can do it pretty easily. Some people really struggle. One of the groups in our society that really struggles with naming fear is men. And I want to talk about that for just a minute. I am not suggesting that every male struggles to name fear. I am not suggesting that. I am also not suggesting that this is a struggle that is unique to men alone. I am not suggesting that. But this is what I know, having been raised a man in America. I was taught from a very young age that fear is weakness. That men that we look up to are brave and they're strong and they don't confess fear. They stand up to it and they fight it. If I had $1 for every time someone told me, and yes, for the times I've told my children, no more, to man up, toughen up, rub some dirt in it. Quit your crying. Move on. Don't be afraid. There's nothing under that bed. Right? Men have a record that plays in our minds that we have got to be strong and we've got to be brave and we cannot be afraid because fear is a sign of weakness. And that's this thing that's in our air. It's kind of in our culture. To some degree, we've all experienced this, right? We've seen it. And what happens, this is what happens. This is where it's damaging for men and their families and friends and relationships and all that stuff on a regular basis. What happens is, instead of naming our fear and dealing with it, we cover it up with misplaced emotion. We get angry. We get aggressive. We get controlling. We might say things like, I'm feeling stressed, right? Well, we might be feeling stressed, but that stress is rooted in fear. But we're trying to cover up for it. And so what happens is it just has this way of getting in and we cover it up because we don't want to name it and we don't want to deal with it and we don't want to work through it because we've been told it's weakness. And so we cover it up and all kinds of stuff happens. I'm going to give you just a very simple example of how it happened to me just recently with our youngest son, Graham. Graham loves aquariums. Coming into this season, he had 3 aquariums in his bedroom. But he wanted a big aquarium because aquariums are like boats. If you have one, you want a bigger one. It's just how it works. And so Graham wanted a bigger aquarium. Well, he proved that he could handle a bigger aquarium by taking care of these other ones. So for Christmas this year, he got a 60-gallon aquarium. Here's a picture of it. So the 60-gallon aquarium, to give you some perspective, this thing is up to here on me. Okay, it's tall. Right? It's over 5 feet tall when you include the stand. It's about 12 inches wide. When you add the sand, the rocks, the water, when you add, I don't really know how much fish, do fish weigh when they're in water? I haven't quite figured that one out. But so when you add all of that together, that thing right there weighs over 800 pounds. 800 pounds. Right there. So one of the most important things you can do when you buy an aquarium of this size is to get that thing installed correctly. It has to be level. That is, you cannot have this fish tank unlevel. It's got to be perfectly level. So we start to install this, and Graham's super excited. I'm excited for him, and I'm thinking, it's not just a gift of a fish tank, it's a gift of time. And I get to spend time with my son, and we're going to install this, and it's going to be wonderful, it's going to be fun. And we got all the tools, and we were talking about it, we got it just in the right place, and everything's going well, and we could not get that little booger balanced. We just couldn't do it. The carpet on his bedroom floor was not helping. We couldn't get it balanced. And we'd get close, but here's what happens with something tall and skinny. A little bit of an error down here becomes a much bigger error up here. It's just the way physics works. And so it would just lean even more and more and more. And I started to express emotion. And some of that emotion was not altogether positive. I said some things, both just in the air. I said some things to the fish tank. I said some things to my son. This was supposed to be a father-son time for us to be together, and it turned into a time that was filled with a lot of stress, a lot of anger. It was not good. We just couldn't get it set. And after several hours, my wife Carrie came in the room and she said, yeah, you guys got to take a break. You need to move away from this. Sometimes when you move away from things, you come up with a solution, but you need to take a break. You guys, this is not working. So we did. We took a break. And later that night, just as I was going to bed, I really felt bad because I'd said some things to Graham and I'd said some things in a way that were not good, that kind of, things that just drive wedges in relationships. And so the next morning, of course, I went to Graham and I said, dude, I am so sorry that I spoke to you that way and that this happened and that. And he goes, I know, Dad, me too. I said some things I shouldn't have said. And, we kind of worked through that together. What I didn't recognize then, and what took me several days to recognize, is that I was not angry with the fish tank. The fish tank is an inanimate object. It bears me no ill will. It is not out to get me. It was not working against me. None of that is true, right? I was not angry at the fish tank. What I didn't realize for several days is that the real issue was I was afraid of the fish tank. Why was I afraid of the fish tank? Because if I don't get that thing installed correctly, right, and it falls on my son or someone else who's in that room, it's going to be a real bad day. Like a real bad day. Fish tank scares me. Here's the second thing that I realized, is that I didn't want to disappoint him. He wants this fish tank in his room so that he can enjoy it. And if we couldn't solve it, it was going to have to be moved downstairs where he couldn't enjoy it the way he wanted to enjoy it. And I did not want to disappoint him. I'm his dad. I do this stuff all the time. I should be able to figure this out. And I couldn't figure it out. And I was so angry that I couldn't figure it out. But it wasn't I was angry at the fish tank. It wasn't I was angry at me. I just didn't want to disappoint my kid, right? But instead, imagine how this could have played out differently. If I just would have sat down with my son and said to him, look, dude, I'm tense because I'm scared. I'm worried if we don't get this thing installed correctly, something could go south and you could get hurt. Or one of your friends could get hurt. And that would devastate me. We got to get this right because I want you to be safe. And I want to get it right and I want to get it here because I don't want you to be disappointed. I'm afraid I could hurt you and I'm afraid I could disappoint you. And those fears are really working on me right now. Right? Imagine the difference in that moment, right? That's a good father-son moment. That's a good relational moment. I missed that moment because I didn't want, wasn't that I didn't want to. I could not recognize my own fear. It got covered up. Now again, this is not just true for men. It can be true for any person, but men, we got to get better at this. It's an issue for us. And there's this guy that I love to follow. His name is Tony Porter. He talks about this stuff in really, really powerful ways. And he tells men over and over and over again, you've got to get out of the man box. You've got to get out of that because it's destroying your life and it's destroying your relationships. Guys, it's okay to be afraid. It is okay for you to be scared. And friends of guys, people who love guys, it's okay for them to be afraid. And it's okay for them to be scared. It's okay. First thing we got to do, we got to say it's okay to be scared. We got to start naming our fears, right? That's the beginning of working through fear. Once we name our fears, one of the other things that we can do to kind of work through our fears is to confront them, to kind of meet them head on. In a clinical term, they might call this exposure therapy, and I want to be very cautious about that because I think there's some things that we're afraid of that if we expose ourselves to them, they can cause some real damage to us, and so we need to be careful about how we do that, particularly very specific phobias. Some phobias can cause people significant trauma when they experience that. And I'm not talking about confronting those kinds of things on your own. It's too risky. Let me just say this real quickly about phobias. Everybody's phobias are weird but your own. You know what I'm talking about. Your phobia makes perfect sense. But that person's phobia, that's so weird. Right? That's so weird, right? Everybody's phobias make sense to them. It's confusing for someone else. Phobias are on a different level. But I do think there's a lot of fears that we confront that we, if we face them and got to the other side, we could see that they don't have to have control over us, right? Let's take fear of flying as an example. I have a fear of flying. I'm anxious about it. I've told you about it. It's what it is. I refuse and will not allow flying, my fear of flying, to keep me from experiencing the abundant life that I can have by flying to other places. I do not enjoy getting on a plane. My family does not enjoy me getting on a plane. There is nobody that enjoys this flight process for me. But I am not going to allow that to keep me from living an abundant life. I'm not going to do it. I refuse to do it. And so I press past it. Here's a picture of me north of the Arctic Circle. Rainy day, foggy day, cloudy day. Not a good day for flying. In this picture, I'm about to get in one of those helicopters behind me and fly into the rainy, foggy, cloudy day to go through some mountains to go spend some time in the wilderness up in the Arctic, right? I did it. Don't let that smile fool you. I was freaking out at this moment. But it was a life-changing experience. And it was absolutely fantastic. And the anxiety and pushing past that and getting on that helicopter and spending that time and then flying back, all of it was worth it, right? And again, I don't need for you to be foolhardy about this stuff. But I'm telling you, if you've got fears and anxieties and you push through them the way I did here, when you come back and you land, it's a rush. It's like, I did it. Fear did not get me today. Fear did not win today. And it feels really good, right? And you can do it. There are times that with help from other people, with supportive families, with supportive therapies, we can push past our fears and we can experience life in spite of those things that we're anxious about, right? And that's what I want to encourage you to think about. So we can name it, we can start to confront it in ways that are safe and healthy, and we can also use our faith, right? We're a people of faith, and faith is a good way for us to handle our fears and anxieties. And what I want to say very clearly, faith does not make fears and anxieties go away. It doesn't. And anybody who tells you otherwise is oversimplifying faith. It doesn't work that way. You know what faith does? It turns down the volume of the fear and the anxiety. It just turns it down. It doesn't mean that it goes away, but it might make it background noise instead of foreground noise. It just turns down the volume. There's a story in the Bible that expresses this perfectly clearly. David, before he was king, had his life threatened by the then king Saul. Saul decides he's going to kill David. David has to run for his life. David is about to die. He's hiding in a cave, and he writes these words. Be merciful to me, my God, for my enemies are in hot pursuit. All day long they press their attack. My adversaries pursue me all day long. In their pride many are attacking me. When I am afraid, I put my trust in you. In God, whose word I praise. In God I trust and am not afraid. What can mere mortals do to me? I promise you that as he was hiding in that cave, David was afraid. He was scared. It didn't just go away. But those words in that prayer turned the fear down, and it gave him some assurance, some hope, and trust. And faith can do that for us with practice. So that's what we're going to do over the next several weeks. We're going to talk about therapeutic ways, concrete ways, things that we can do, things our faith can help us do, so that we can address very real issues that cause us very real fear. This is my hope, is that if we can do that in an honest and authentic way, we can find ourselves in a place where we are living lives that are less afraid and filled with more courage and hope. Together, I think we can take steps toward that. I'm really looking forward to this journey. And I think together we will hear some good and promising news about how it is that we can find life, even in the midst of our fears. Amen.